Bueno, muchas gracias por la espera. Ya vamos a empezar con la charla de Natalia. Thank you, Natalia.
Okay, welcome everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Natalia I, Kucirkova, and I work in Norway at the International Center for EdTech Impact. I started as a researcher looking at the impact of educational technologies, or EdTech for short. And I've been looking at how young children engage with various types of apps, learning platforms, kinds of EdTech that we see are being advertised for young children. And I've been really struck by how the quality with which young children engage on a daily basis influences their thinking and their learning. So as I've been researching this topic as an academic, as a scholar, both at the Open University in England, later at University College in London, I saw that when researchers are involved in the production of the various apps that young children use, we can actually make quite a big difference. So I myself have been lucky to co-design an app for young children that's called Our Story. And Our Story is an app that allows children to make their own stories. So essentially to create any story they would like in both images, audio, video, and then they can share it with their parents or grandparents, anyone they would like. And out of that work grew my interest in creating more apps for young children, more technologies. And we set up a center that allows us to connect designers and developers with researchers so that they can create new technologies for young children. The center has grown, so now we not only create these technologies, but we also evaluate what is out there in the market. We are based at the University of Stavanger, so the university co-owns the center. And what we do is to do basically matchmaking, that we match academics or scholars who are at various universities with EdTech providers so that they can create and evaluate various EdTech for young children. We started with the focus on literacy, so reading and writing, but then we expanded to all topics to do with children's learning. So we are looking at mathematics, science learning, socio-emotional skills, all kinds of EdTech that are out there. And I want to tell you why this work motivates me. What is the passion behind the center? At the moment, we have 1,200 academics who want to do this work and who want to change the current status quo. We want to solve the problem. And the problem that we have is that there is a huge imbalance between the amount of money that is being spent on EdTech and the actual learning that we are seeing on young children. So this quote is taken from the UNESCO GEM report in 2023 that very clearly found that the added value of EdTech for young children just isn't there. We have a huge problem in terms of the money that goes into EdTech and the result we are seeing on young children's learning. At the same time, we have a huge opportunity because as the world crisis is around the fact that 70% of 9 to 10-year-olds cannot read at an optimal level. These are statistics from World Bank, and they are based on data that have come from mostly countries in Global South. So how can we solve this learning crisis? Well, EdTech does offer a big opportunity in terms of designing tools that can be accessed by many, many children and that can push them out of poverty, and of illiteracy. But for that, EdTech needs to be optimally designed. It needs to be designed for learning impact. At the moment, on the App Store, whether you go to the Google App Store or Android App Store, you'll find many, many apps, 500,000 apps, that are labeled educational applications. But when researchers look at what is behind this label, educational, we see that there is very little going on in terms of education. One article by Jenny Radeski and colleagues found that most selling apps, so the apps that are most downloaded and used by young children, use manipulative features, aggressive gamification that makes children pay attention to the screen, but they are really not learning. Another study has found that when children use these apps, at the end of the session, there just wasn't any learning. They were just, meaninglessly tapping on the screen, looking at some hotspots. And yet, we can design apps that don't do this, that are really pushing children's learning, that can teach them new skills. So how can we make sure that most of the apps that young children access are of high quality, and we move away from this junk that is out there? And that is the challenge that we want to initiate and that we want to change. And of course, it's not just myself and our center. This is a movement of global nature. There are many scholars, many researchers who care about this, as well as policymakers, philanthropic sources, and others. In this report with David Doctorman from Harvard Graduate School of Education in US, we argue for a paradigm shift, so transformation of the way EdTech has been produced to a new generation of educational technologies. And the change in our thinking is also coming from funders or investors who believe that we can create EdTech that has a positive impact on young children. We just have to change the business model behind how EdTech is produced and scaled. So the Jacobs Foundation, they are part of the funding that our center has received, and that has funded a lot of the work that goes into bringing researchers to EdTech developers. There are also some standards out there in countries where there is a real push for evidence to be in educational technologies. And of course, the global agencies such as World Bank, UNESCO, they really care about the quality of EdTech that children receive. I don't know if you're familiar with the different standards that exist when it comes to looking at the evidence or the level of research that is in children's technologies, but I can tell you about some of them. So in USA, there are the ESSA standards of evidence. And that means that if an EdTech developer wants to sell their technology to schools or districts in USA, they need to comply with these ESSA standards. They are at 4 levels or 4 tiers, and each tier represents a different type of study, a research study, that the developer should have done with their technology. So you cannot go to US schools and be just selling technology without having a proof that it has a positive impact on children's learning. And we are seeing this movement towards standards for developers in other countries. In Australia, they have Australian standards of evidence, again at different levels depending on what is the expectation for research, that different technologies and educational resources more broadly should have. I don't think there are any standards in Colombia yet, but there might be coming. In Europe, we have an emerging standard. I work with the UK government on another standard. So there are definitely different standards emerging in different countries. And it is a question of time when these standards become the mandatory yardstick for all EdTech developers. You can think of the importance of evidence in terms of the 5 E's of impact that all technologies should have. And I do mean here EdTech that target young children, but also EdTech that target higher education, that want to make an impact on teachers or on parents. Whoever is your user, we need to make sure that there is a positive impact in terms of efficacy, effectiveness, ethics, equity, and environment. Efficacy answers the very simple question, does the solution work? Does the solution have a positive impact on young children? When we take your solution and compare it to another solution, can we see that there is an added value for children's learning? Those kinds of questions can researchers answer, but we haven't seen those questions answered by many EdTech developers yet. For effectiveness, we are asking, could the solution work? What could we do so that the solution is designed in a way that it becomes effective? And those are kinds of studies that are conducted together with teachers, together with parents who are using the technology in an active way with the children. We also need to care about equity. Is your technology really targeting the children who need it most, the marginalized children who need to be pushed most when it comes to the different outcomes? Oh, thank you. Ethics, that's the question around, well, do we actually have all the data processes in place in accordance to ethical standards? Of course, when it comes to AI, artificial intelligence, this is a very pertinent question. Where is the data stored? How do we manage the data? But it is a question that applies to all EdTech. And lastly, environment. You may have seen that UNESCO has been working a lot on the connection between digital and green education. And it is precisely something we need to ask with the new kinds of EdTech that use a lot of AI, and where there is a high proportion or a large amount of energy consumption. So environment and the impact that EdTech have on the planet, that's also a question we need to ask. So this is a real paradigm shift when it comes to thinking about EdTech. Asking these questions is not something that you usually hear when you speak to EdTech providers. They'll tell you how many users they have, they'll tell you how much users love their product, and all that is wonderful, but we also want to make sure that there is a positive impact on all these E's. Now, what researchers at our center have done was to take all the literature, so all the different studies that have been published, summarize them and consolidate them so that we develop some criteria for evaluating current technologies. And these reports are publicly available. They are open access for anyone to use. And they have been implemented in various evaluation frameworks. So if Colombia wants to develop a national evaluation scheme, you don't need to do the work again. There is publicly available material that can be used for inspiration and looking what kinds of standards there are out there. Companies can also check where they are with their efficacy and effectiveness. This is a freely available tool where any company can go in and check, okay, have we done this kind of study? Did we do this? Did we do that? And they can see what is their score in relation to international standards. So this is a self-assessment tool. And when you get more and more companies that care about evidence, we can be then signaling to schools and parents what level of evidence they have. And this is very easily done with certifications. So the ICEIE, or EduEvidence, is a not-for-profit organization that issues certifications for EdTech based on their level of evidence. So if a company has conducted a study, they can get certified so that everyone can see that they have done a study that counts in the international market or on the international stage. This is a new type of work and is something that we see a great appetite for from multiple countries. And the reason this certification isn't a commercial certification where anyone can just buy a badge or a certificate is that it was set up in a way that allows for an independent verification. So when a company submits what they have done, it gets sent to a validator. The validator examines whether everything is correct. Then they compare it to the national and international standard. They look at the weight of the evidence, how solid is the research that the company reports. How much do they care about ethics? How much do they care about equity and environment? And then they get a certification. And you can see that there are multiple certifications in the individual strands. So if a company has been already certified, they can get automatically recertified so that they don't have to do the work again. And this is a system that allows us to see on a global scale the quality of EdTech products. So the different certificates and badges then list what exactly the company has done, who validated them, for how long is the certificate valid for, and what kind of evidence is it based on. And companies use these certificates, of course, for marketing, but also for making sure that when they sell their products, the different stakeholders who buy it, whether it's schools, policymakers, or parents, they can see independent proof of evidence. And the goal here is to create a global database of EdTech solutions that we know work, that we know have a positive impact on the users. And we know it not because the providers, the developers say so, but we know it because it has been independently verified through a number of different studies. It's like a competition for the different EdTech providers. They all can see what others have achieved, what has been the system for achieving that, and they can see in which type of impact they need to improve their design. You might have a company that is very good at equity, but perhaps they have not done an efficacy study. So they might then prioritize that kind of work for next time. So it allows us to calculate a total score of impact, which is then used to rank the different solutions. So instead of going on the App Store with 500,000 educational apps where you can only see some stars rating and how many downloads they have, you can be also checking EdTech based on the positive impact they have on young children. And that is done through databases like this one. The work that I'm sharing with you is the work of researchers who work in EdTech. It is not only the work of the center that I represent, but it is the work of many academics who care about this and who are passionate to change the status quo. And the risk that academics take is similar to the risk that EdTech have to take. Because when we go for research, We don't know whether the impact will be positive or negative or neutral. There might be just no effect after we have measured young children's use of the technology. So we all have to accept that there will be a certain level of risk for the companies to undertake research. And the ethical companies that don't just want a short-term gain, don't just want a quick tick in the box, but actually want to go on the journey into the iterative cycle of research, those kinds of companies are the winners. They are the companies that can have a sustained impact on their users. And trust me, there are quite a few of those. They're the companies that typically would leverage the impact that they can have through various networks. So as you would know, there are many, many researchers out there. They have different types of expertise. I am interested in literacy. Other researchers are interested, I don't know, in mathematics or outdoor learning or executive functioning. There are many, many different types of research. And what we do is that we take the domain experts and match them with the specific domain of the technology. So if you have a technology that is looking at how young children's socio-emotional skills can be improved, then we would want to have a professor who works with socio-emotional skills in young children to work together with this EdTech company. We would also want to have someone who understands the methodology and someone who understands how EdTech work. It is in the end a business, so it needs to be a viable product that is developed and that gets sold. So it needs to be an academic who has that mindset. So at the center, we do this matchmaking to find the right academics to work with the right companies and build the dream team so that there can be positive impact. And it is important to emphasize that there needs to be a full evidence cycle. So it is not only about the design of the technology, it is also about where the technology is implemented, evaluating how the technology is used in schools, and validating the technology through various experiments. So all kinds of research, all kinds of methodologies are important when we talk about EdTech research. And last bit I want to share with you has to do with how do we integrate what we know from research in terms of how children learn, so the science of learning. How can we take that knowledge and put it into educational technologies? So a very simple example is the one here, where you can essentially see a redesign of an application where initially the designers thought that if children see the text and they get the sounds and the letters all at the same time, that is a good idea. And the application has been out and used by millions of children before they came to our center. And our researchers noticed that actually the children are not really making progress because they're overwhelmed with the way information is presented to them. So there was a little tweak in the design that actually made a big difference to children's ability to learn from the app. So it's often not the case that we need to completely remove the technology or, ban, as some of these mobile smartphone bans are coming. It is really the question of how can we make it better? How can we elevate the quality? So in this case, it's a simple redesign so that we can have the science of learning embedded in the technology. And here are just some simple learning principles that we know have been researched and proven over time and time again, and that we don't see embedded in the technologies that children use. It's explainable with the fact that these technologies are designed by developers, by business people, so they cannot have the research knowledge. So that is why we are trying to bring the researchers to work with them so that when the design is made, it is aligned with what the science is saying about optimal learning. I'll just mention here that the third principle under C, the spatial contiguity effect, that's essentially what I showed you here, making sure that the image and the text are not jumped together, but that there is some space so that the child can process the information. We know how the brain works, so we need to take that into account when we design these technologies. So there are some principles for that. And here you have 10 principles from learning sciences developed by our partner, Digital Promise. So again, taking the science of learning, translating it into some simple guidance that developers and designers can use so that the technologies they have can have a positive impact on children's learning. And I mentioned that there are many companies that care about this and many investors that care about that. So we are fortunate to work with them and with their portfolio companies. And we hope that this will be a trend that will be emulated by many other investors and many other companies. Essentially, it is the matter of the people who have control over how money is spent, so the funders and investors, who can make the decision that they want the technologies that they invest in to be impactful, to have a positive impact. So they can then also invest in the research that needs to happen so that these technologies are redesigned and evaluated in that way. There are also technologies or developers who themselves want to change, want to have the science embedded into that, and they come to us and work with our researchers. A lot of this work is funded through philanthropic grants, so various philanthropies and global agencies that support this work, and we hope that it is also something that national governments can support. Because in the end, this is about the ecosystem, right? It is about making sure that overall the system change, that we do not only change one single technology, one little app that I developed when I was doing my PhD, but that this is something that really changes the ecosystem, the 500,000 apps, the 1,000 of learning platforms that are out there. All this needs to change if we want to tackle the learning crisis. So we need to work together as an ecosystem of users, developers, teachers, policymakers, researchers. We all need to come together to think about how we can change the status. So collaborative EdTech ecosystem. So if you're interested in this type of work, please join us. We have regular webinars that are widely attended from people also in Colombia. We have seen them at some of our webinars, so we'll be delighted if you could join too. It's an open movement towards evidence and learning sciences in EdTech. The next one will be about how we can have more universities working with EdTech providers. So we'll be discussing the different financing mechanisms so that all EdTech can access researchers, not only the big ones who have the money, but also the startups. So that will be the next session in November, and you're all very welcome to also check our Substack and YouTube channel and what have you. There are many resources about this topic. And we have some time for questions, so I'll pause here and invite you to ask me any question you would like. I think you'll get a microphone. Okay.
Hi, thank you for your time. I have several questions actually, because taking into account that technology can be very useful in order to for personal growing, for education. how do you see now the framework around the world? Because in my time, I'm not saying that I'm too old, but before I remember Nordic countries were the countries where people usually read the most. I don't know how many books per year, and now we have this new technology, tablets and phones. How the children are getting related to these tools, because you were saying that's one of the biggest problems, that children right now, you invest in the education, but they are not learning actually, because I don't know, the technology maybe is not fulfilling the goal that we think the technology should have. So how do you see all this situation? Also because if you give a kid, I don't know, a phone, and he could read a book, I don't know, an electronic book, or he can go to Instagram or TikTok, how to focus, to help the kid to focus on learning, because that's a trend right now, a bad trend, that people cannot focus for more than 15 seconds, for example, because of stories, reels, and more. So how can we help children to understand that it's good to read a book, even if you had the chance to play a game, I don't know. And also I have another question is, I remember I had a really good friend, really smart one, and he told me, being smart doesn't mean that you know everything. It means that you are really good at one thing. How the EdTech can help people to understand what are they good at, and to improve those abilities, those skills, because it's not mandatory that I have to know physics, chemic, mathematics. I could be really good in something else, I don't know. So how do you see from your perspective these two problems?
Okay, thank you. Those are great questions. So I can start by saying that in the Nordics, we advocate for the so-called slow design. So instead of having a lot of input on the screen, you design the technologies, and that is also how we design a TV channel. The national TV channel is very much pushing for this slow design, the slow engagement that goes kind of against the social media and the way those are designed. But for children, children's technologies, it is really the philosophy to having engagement together with education. So to engage children so that they pay attention, but not to overwhelm them, not to get them glued to the screen, or as they say, addicted to the screen, but only so that they pay enough attention so that the learning process can happen. Now, if that is not happening, and they're only engaged, but are not learning, then I understand the argument that we perhaps don't need the technology. So there needs to be a very good reason for why the technology is used. And that is something that is advocated by our policymakers and by our schools. And your second question was more about how do we make sure that the learning is personalized enough so that we get to each child what their desires, talents, needs are. And that is where technology is very good at, right? Especially with analytics, with the way they process data. And that is where we need to be extremely careful when we process the children's data so that we can tailor the content to what the child needs and should be having, rather than using it for commercial purposes, advertisements, which is unfortunately what often happens. I don't know who was next. I think it was the gentleman in the back.
Thanks. Good day. My question was related very close to what the guy who was over there was talking. And we've seen, for instance, that there are some countries who are leading the educational list all the world. And he mentioned even countries like Finland, like France, and they just began to ban all the uses of any kind of devices. So if it happen in just a developing country, we could even wonder, okay, it is understandable, but when it happens in the most developed countries related with the high educational levels, that's the way we wonder if that's possible, if the path we have to move on. So the question is, what are the real risks of having children exposed to so long time on screens? And I consider that the most probably is the leaders of educational system in those countries are based in scientific support and scientific evidence that the best they can do is ban all kind of interaction and go back to the old spaces with they were treating with real education. So what are those red lines related with all kind of challenge we are facing at this time with all the developed in the world well the system like AI is developing. And another question relating is about the trends. What do you consider is the trend? Because with some people, in my case, for instance, that I'm related with some developing, we are always searching what are the trends so we can work now in order to get some innovations more often. Okay, thanks so much.
Yeah, that's another great question. So, you know how I showed you the slide where it was written that the review by UNESCO shows that there is no added value for EdTech, for young children, that it is not demonstrated in the research they have summarized. So that report in 2023 has led to the national bans of mobile phones and smartphones that is currently now in 60 countries. And that is including France and Finland and other countries. So that is what I'm talking about. If we want to avoid these bans, if we want young children to use technologies, because we believe that technology can offer some innovation, that technology can offer some personalized learning, that it has an added value, then we need to demonstrate the added value, and we need to design it in a way that is really persuading the people who want to just ban it, that look, this works, this is better for the child than not having it. But at the moment, we have very little evidence to show that. So when policymakers ask researchers, show me the evidence, show me that the use of the phone will be really beneficial for these children, we need to be able to show them some studies. And at the moment, we don't have them, because that is not how EdTech has been developed, used, evaluated. So it's a natural backlash that is coming and that we are trying to address through working with designers and researchers. Yes?
You mentioned that places like the US and Europe are putting in guidelines and kind of a structure around creating certifications for the evidence. And you mentioned, I think, Colombia does not have that yet, and I'm guessing many other Latin American countries do not. How would you suggest implementing something like that in Latin America?
Oh, that's a good question, yes. I suppose is to be thinking about how not to reinvent the wheel, right? So if we know that there has been already a lot of input, a lot of work done in terms of looking at the different standards across the world and consolidating them in a framework, then I would recommend to look at that work at eduevidence.org and other organizations that have already done this preparation, and to see if it can be adopted into a national scheme. But I would make sure that any national scheme is really designed in mind with what works in our country, what works in our context. Every curriculum is different. Each country has their own educational curriculum. It's very important to involve the teachers in the process so that it doesn't come as a top-down certification that, damages innovation or damages what teachers think about the solutions. It needs to be an open discussion, a collaboration that we have seen being successful in other countries where these processes have been implemented and followed through. I think there was one more question, yes?
Yeah, thank you very much. Natalia, I would like to ask you about funding opportunities in this area, and not only for non-profits, but also for institutions developing such technology. And do you think that there's like exploding the funding opportunities, or it is reducing? That is my question.
Yeah, another great question. So on foreduimpact.org, I think it's /open calls. We list different grant opportunities as they come up globally. So it's not only in specific countries, but internationally, where there are essentially open opportunities for EdTech developers to apply for a grant so that they can work with researchers. And the grant covers the time of everyone involved. Then there are various competitions, like the tools competition, X Prize, many sort of challenges where companies can go for. But all this is competitive, so you sort of need to do the work to be selected. Another way of funding the work, especially for EdTech that have some budget, is to think about the money that goes towards marketing and take that money from marketing into research. Because trust me, when you do the research, that's the best marketing you can have, both for policymakers and schools, if you can show them that your solution has been evaluated by researchers, independently verified that this is positive for children. And then, of course, there are these different investors. So going to a VC, an investor who cares about it and who can put money towards the research from the start, not only for the business side, but also for the actual impact work. Okay, I think that's it in terms of our time. Oh, one more question, okay. I'm so pleased you have many questions. Please also email me.
Hello, Natalia. Thank you for coming to Colombia. Thank you for giving all this information. I own a school, and every single day, a lot of providers knock at my door selling me what sounds like EdTech. There's any maybe advice or maybe a checklist that we can use? Because when we look at the page that you gave us, all the providers are from the United States, are from Europe, but what they give us is more or less the same, LMS that we can fill with a lot of information, but we don't have maybe a checklist or something that can give us enough tools to answer back for something that maybe the students will need, or maybe goes aligned with the schedules or with the strategy that we're building for them. So there's any advice that you can give us, the schools or maybe the universities, to buy good things or to acquire good things that we can put that we can use for the students? Thank you.
Yes, yes, I love your question, and please email you. I can send you something. You know, in USA, they went so far that they don't only ask the companies to fill out a checklist, but they also say that I'm going to buy your technology, but I'm only going to pay a little bit, 40%, and I'll pay the other 60% when I can see that the technology has a positive impact on my school. So that is a movement we are seeing is coming, but at the moment, we need to have at least some questions that make the providers care about the quality of the product. So there are some questions that I can suggest, and I can email them to you, but they're also available on the different websites that I mentioned, so you can create your own checklist until something perhaps comes from the government. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.